So, Shaun, final piece of today's show. We're going to get to the R part of the RTCF show. We're going to get to R and T, but we're not going to get to the CF today. But when I look at the recruiting on the defensive line, you and I kind of started talking about it a little bit in the last segment. Defensive end recruiting, the question is, okay, has Notre Dame closed the gap with defensive line recruiting? And the answer is no, they have not closed the gap. They are slowly closing the gap, but it's not there yet. Some years it's good at end, some years it's good at tackle. Not enough years it's been good at both. And my frustration that I have, and I expressed this on the message board today, is not that Notre Dame is recruiting perfectly on the defensive line. It's the opposite overreaction of how I had somebody say the other day that the last 2-year defensive line recruiting has been lackluster. So a defensive line haul that has Bryce Young, Logan Thomas, Chris Burgess, Joseph Reef, Davion Dixon, Dominic Hulak, who all are ranked as 4 stars by at least one group of people, all by me. Cole Mullins, Sean Sevillano, and Gordy Solstead is lackluster. And this is my problem. There's this, what happens when people jump off a cliff with overreactions is now someone who would otherwise be your ally that it needs to be better is now stuck having to defend the recruiting of the defensive line because you've gone so far in the opposite direction. That's the frustration. So what we're going to try to do is have a rational conversation about where defensive line recruiting is, because it's neither lackluster, subpar, average, all the things I've seen literally in the last 24 hours said about D-line recruiting. It's not that. That's an overreaction. And it's not good enough yet either. It's not elite yet either. It's getting slowly closer when you're able to, in a 3-year stretch, land Boubacar Traore, Armel Mukam, Bryce Young, Logan Thomas, Chris Burgess, and Joe Reef, Dom Hulak, those 3 guys in a year after year after year basis. That's about as good as the defensive end recruiting Notre Dame has done in a 3-year stretch in a long time. Because let's not forget, that great 2018 defensive end group, literally every single kid from that group was in the same freaking class. They were all recruited in the 2016 class. Khalid Kareem, Dalen Hayes, Julian Aguara, Adetokunbo Ogundiji, and Jameer Jones were all recruited in one class. The year before, they signed no defensive ends in the 2016 class. In the 2017 class, I think Notre Dame signed Jonathan McCullough, and that was it. And no, there was one other D end who, let me go find that one. You know what I'm talking about, right? Let me go, hold on a second. Let me pull up Notre Dame's 2017 class, because I know that they signed Jonathan McCullough, who was there for like a year and transferred. Give me a second, Shaun. I'm going to pull up this 17 class, because I remember the defensive tackle recruiting that year. You got Kurt Heinisch and Myron Tungavaloa Mosa, but a defensive end, it was obviously not as good of a class. But the point is, it's like, and then 2015, you get Jerry Tillery. And then 2016, when you get this great defensive end class, you sign 0 tackles. In 2015, when you had Jerry Tillery and Elijah Taylor, Brandon Tiassam, and Micah Dutredway, you got 0 defensive ends. You signed Bo Wallace, but he ends up not being allowed into school. And you just had this constant just inconsistency from year to year, where it made it hard to have consistency on the defensive line. And I think Notre Dame is still kind of in that zone a little bit, Shaun, where I love what they're doing with defensive end recruiting. Defensive tackle recruiting is a little bit up and down, where some years it's really good. Other years it's like, that's not good enough. You know, where you've got to move Cole Mullins inside to have a 2-man D tackle group, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. I'm sorry. They had Kofi Wardlow and Jonathan McCollister were the 2 edge players that year. And so, like, you have that great 2016 class, and in 2015, nobody. 2016, you only get Kofi Wardlow and Jonathan McCollister. It's not good. That you can't do that. Defensive end recruiting is so much beyond that right now. The question is D tackle recruiting. And so so we're going to talk big picture about that. Then we'll go over the board. But that's my thing, Shaun, is if Notre Dame just keeps doing what they're doing on the edge, and you mentioned a couple guys in the 26 class we really like, we'll get into that. D tackle is the one position where they've got to find some answers. Now, you have to accept the fact, guys, the portal's always just going to have to be a part of this now. You're going to have to be able to go get Jared Dawson's every year out of the portal at defensive tackle. Not every year, more often than not. Like you've had to do on defensive end. Now you don't need to do that at defensive end anymore. But tackle, you're going to have years you're going to have to do that. That's just the reality of it, because it is going to be harder to consistently land 2-3 defensive tackles every year that are dudes. But you've got to be more consistent than what they've been. You've got to close better than what they've done. And that didn't start with Al Washington. Let's be honest about that. That started before Al Washington got here. He hasn't fixed it. But that to me is really right now where recruiting at Notre Dame is lacking. I'm very happy with defensive end recruiting. It's inside where it's a bit of a bigger question mark.
And you just pointed out why, right? We talk about the geographical thing makes it difficult, and then also just Notre Dame being different. And B. Smitty has always told us, like, this is the going rate for interior guys. Top interior guys in recruiting classes, and that's something that Notre Dame's not just not willing to do, but they might be willing to do it, if they're going out in the portal and to get someone like a Jared Dawson. As far as the edge, I think they've taken really big steps forward. As far as going out and identifying guys, a guy like Logan Thomas, in order to get him, they bailed on somebody else that we really liked in the edge, and they preferred Logan Thomas. Then you have to tip your cap, because from what we've seen, the bits and pieces, we like what we see.
Who's that?
Him.
About the kid that went to Miami?
Yes.
Who I actually liked Logan more than him.
Forget you did.
Right.
You did.
Yeah.
You like Marquise Lightfoot. That's what I'm thinking about.
Who's a good player.
Yeah.
And was probably a better high school player going into the senior seasons than Logan was, but I always thought Logan had more upside. And I don't think Notre Dame fans understand how good he was as a senior, Logan Thomas. He was dominant at Lakewood, St. Edward and Lakewood. But anyway, continue, Shaun.
That's an evaluation thing, right? You evaluate, you have a different ceiling for a kid, and he might not be as highly ranked, but you can't be mad at what you've seen, to say, okay, man, we like the upside of this kid. You just said he's probably the most athletically gifted young man in the room. And so, when you talk about the edge and what they've done, they've taken a step forward. They're closing the gap. And I think they still want to maybe I'm looking forward to, I think the 26 class could be like that final push to really say we're there. And we'll get into some of those kids, because I love the 2 kids out of the Carolinas. If they get both of those kids at Viper, I'm like, okay. Now we're cooking with grease. But it's the same thing even in the 26 class, as you referred back to the other classes, whether it was with Mike Elston during his time here or now Coach Washington. That interior has been something that's been a question mark. And looking forward, the portal is going to be very much part of making sure that everything can come together on the interior of the defensive line. But I do like the fact that they've gone out, they've got Sevillano, they've gotten Davion Dixon. Those are youngsters that are going to be in your system. Gabriel Rubio, I think one of the keys that we're going to watch Armel Mukam and Jason Onye this year. We're going to watch those guys. Like, who do they become? Can they become what we as a staff thought, looking at them, what their upside was, what we thought they could become during their playing days here in Notre Dame. But other than that, I just really still have a question mark on the interior. We talked about a kid. I told you about a kid that I loved here in Chicago. That was a quick riser that Notre Dame hopefully is going to get on, coming up, in the next month or two. We talk about, of course, they just lost a kid, the Samoda kid to USC, who committed to USC. We know the Tikahoka kid from Texas that came up for the junior day. We'll see whether or not they can close a deal with him. The Noah Clark kid is another kid that I know has a possibility of possibly being part of the class. I know that Mikael Blade, who is a Chicago kid that Al Washington has been on heavily earlier than most, even before he
Can we
started to
talk
pick up.
about that real quick, Shaun? I think that's an
Yeah,
important thing. One thing that gives me some optimism about the 26 D-line class is that right there. One of the criticisms we've had about Washington in the past was there was some inconsistency when it came to how hard Notre Dame was on the kid. I reached out. We'll give some inside baseball to people. You and I have talked the last couple of weeks, and I've said, "Hey, Shaun, I want you to reach out to this kid, this kid, coach. I want to find out where things stand with Notre Dame and D-line recruiting, and I want to specifically find out where things stand in regard to their relationship with the D-line coach." And every single kid that you've reached out to or coach has said, "Oh, he's all over this kid. They talk all the time." One kid who's a top 100 recruit, whose name I won't say, basically told us that he talks to Al Washington almost daily. This is where you need to be. That's a good thing. So that doesn't mean they're going to close, but like that gives you more optimism that the relationship is being established to where if Notre Dame can come up with a package that's competitive enough that they can land some of these battles. And we're hearing things from parents that it's going really well with the parents. That's the thing that's a positive right now. Now, that doesn't mean a hill of beans if the class isn't signed, that's signed isn't good enough. Doesn't mean anything. All we're saying is that right now on February 22nd, that's much better feedback than we have gotten in past years, top to bottom. There was always a kid or here or there that he would be all over, and they normally got those kids. It was the lack of consistency. And that's what we're hearing right now is a lot of the top guys on the board, like I'll just beat one kid in particular. Shaun, you reached out to the Ebenezer Edewade kid, and the feedback that you got from his coach, can I say this? Was that Notre Dame is all over him, Al Washington all over him, and Joe Rudolph and the offensive staff are all over Kenny Ogboku, who's the offensive lineman for that school, who's a stud. But, I mean, we've heard great feedback about the job that Al Washington has done on him. You mentioned Mikael Blade. He has mentioned to you in the past how close him and Al Washington are. So that's what gives me hope, Shaun, early hope, that things will be different, because that was not always the story in the past.
yeah.
And that's why I'm a little bit more like, hey, guys, let it play out a little bit. Let's not freak out right now and say, it's going to be okay. Because obviously a lot of the freak out's coming because they didn't get Samote Katoanga, who, honestly, I thought they were going to get for a long time. He was silently committed to Notre Dame. But the reality is, I won't give too much, but circumstances changed, and the time frame was arbitrarily sped up to kind of have him make a decision sooner. He had an official visit scheduled to Notre Dame. He had an official visit scheduled to Oregon, and there was some pressure put on him to commit early, and he went with it. It's fine. It's a big loss. There's no doubt it's a big loss. When you have a kid that talented and you think he's going to be in the class, that's a loss. But the question is not whether it's a loss or not. It is. Anyone trying to spin it, oh, he'll flip down the road. You don't know that. And if he does flip down the road, what are the odds he's going to flip to Notre Dame? Like, how often does that happen? Number one. It's okay to say, man, it's a big loss. Just like losing Will Shipley was a big loss. He's a good football player. He was very good at Clemson. Could you imagine what Will Shipley would have done behind the Notre Dame offensive line? He's now playing in the Super Bowl, if I remember correctly, for the Eagles, right? It's okay to say that was a big loss, but then not lose your minds and not be one to say, okay, let's let it play out and see what they rebound with, because Notre Dame's rebound was even better than the loss because they got Logan Diggs and Audric Estime. So let's see what they do, because who's on the board now at defensive end, Shaun, after losing Samote? It's Mikael Blade and Elijah Golden and Dre Quinn. Yeah. Three very talented football players. Mikael Blade's been a top target for them for a while. That's an interesting one, Shaun, because you and I think, both for a while thought Mikael would probably grow into a D tackle. Yeah. But he's a lot like Bubakar. He hasn't taken that big jump body-wise, where now I look at him more after seeing kind of him this past winter, some different things I've seen this past winter of him. I think he's now going to stay on the edge because he hasn't blown up the way that we thought he was. I think he's now more of an edge player, which is where Notre Dame is seeing him right now. Elijah Golden is still a little bit of that hybrid Riley Mills type. Probably start off at big end and then see where his body goes. And then, of course, Dre Quinn is a dude who's also – he's more of the 225 that will become 250 as a defensive end.
Yeah.
That's three really talented players. You got to get one, and I would argue you got to get two. If you get Elijah Golden, I think you also need Mikhail Blade. And if you get Mikhail – for end, because I don't know that Elijah Golden can stick on the edge. I'm a lot more confident that Mikhail Blade's going to be able to stick on the edge in this defense. So that's the thing is like, okay, it's a loss, but what do you end up getting is the key.
Yeah.
We've seen Notre Dame lose really good players in the past, and their bounce back pickup ends up being better than the guy that they lost. And that's what Al Washington has to do here is, okay, how do you handle adversity? You lost a kid you thought you were going to get. All right, so who do you end up with? You go get Mikhail Blade and Elijah Golden. All right, I'm good.
Yeah.
That's going to be the key, Shaun. And that's the board right now. It's the top of the board right now. It's Mikhail Blade. It's Elijah Golden as the hybrid. He's the top hybrid on the board right now. End tackle hybrid. Mikhail's and Dre Quinn are in that top group of just pure edge guys right now at the defensive end position. That's a really good board, Shaun. Yeah. Really good board.
I really think just to close this out, because I know we don't want to prolong the time. It's already been almost 3.5 hours, but to just really sum up everything with the defensive line, I think the promise of the defensive line is there. I think the talent is there. Now we get to see the impact of the coaching, the impact of his development, because for the first time, I think in his tenure, this is truly Al Washington's defensive line. This is his defensive line. And so now, from the rooter to the tutor, as they say, guys on the roster and guys recruiting going forward, now we get a true picture of his vision, his blueprint, how he sees things, and what his evaluation is for the players that are in, the defensive line room. And so looking at the 26 class, like I said, yeah, Samote is a loss. We'll see how it plays out. But other than that, I really like the board right now.
Yeah.
I like the board.
Yeah.
Right. Because there were in the past classes, I think the board was kind of like, you had a couple like, why are we on this one
right
this early?
And then there was nobody else after that. I mean,
right.
You lose the kid from Indy last year that goes to LSU, and it's like there is no one else on the board. You end up moving Dom Hulak there.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no backup plan. There was, or not even a backup plan. There wasn't like Mikhail Blade and Elijah Golden and Dre Quinn are not backup plans to Samote. They were all A group guys, and you need to get one of them.
Right.
These aren't backup plans. Logan Diggs and Audric Estime were backup plans because Notre Dame had no other board. They had to regroup and go after those guys. And fortunately, they got it done. Tommy Reese went and got Logan Diggs, and then Lance Taylor did a really nice job of going to get Audric Estime. But the thing here is there is a board there. Now, here's my concern with the board, Shaun, is because the board is talented, and we're going to go over here real quick, but it's not as deep for when you consider they have nobody committed. The board's not quite as deep as I would like it, but it's very talented. So we talked about defensive end with Mikhail Blade, Dre Quinn, and then you've got Elijah Golden as sort of a swing guy, a big end. Maybe could play some 4-eye, could maybe grow into a 3 technique. Just depends on how his body grows out. At Viper, you've got 2 dudes on the list. You've got Ebenezer Edewade from North Carolina, and you've got also Rodney Dunham from North Carolina. Got to get one of those 2 guys right now. That's literally your Viper board right now, Shaun, is those 2 guys. Now, Notre Dame loves their current Viper depth chart, which is still very young, and that allows them to kind of shoot for the stars, so to speak, in this class at Viper. But to me, you can't go a second year without getting a top-level Viper guy. And you can talk to me all you want about, and we love Dom Hulak. You didn't when you got his commitment. You didn't view him as a Viper when you got his commitment. It ended up working out for you to a degree. We'll see how he plays. I get that. But you need to get one of those 2 guys. Those are 2 impact players. Both raw, but that's okay. You don't need them to come in and be day one guys. And then at defensive end, we talked about the question mark for me is like a lot we talked about. It's the inside. I like the board a lot right now. You've got Tiki Hola, who's got Notre Dame as top 5. He visited in January, went great. All the feedback we've gotten since then is the relationship has only grown. I would put up his 5 back then when he visited. I thought Notre Dame was 4th or 5th. I now think they're clearly in the top 3 of the teams on his board. He's going to supposedly come back for a visit in the spring and do an official visit to Notre Dame. After that, it's a little bit more of a question mark of who are they going to get. They like Noah Clark a lot. He hasn't visited yet. And until he visits, we don't really know. Yeah. And he's going to have to visit unofficially because it's very rare that a kid's first visit to Notre Dame is an official and they get him. That rarely happens. So you got to try to get him up for the spring. A guy to keep an eye on is Damari Simeon out of New Jersey. His recruitment has really blown up this spring. Very high on the board for Notre Dame. Notre Dame likes him a lot. He likes Notre Dame a lot. 6'3", 275, long arms, twitchy. He'll be 6'3", 295 when it's all said and done. He's a guy that they like a lot. I'm curious to see if he gets back this spring. That's going to tell us a lot if he makes a spring visit. And then you've got like King Liggins, who's out of Chicago, who the staff is still talking to and evaluating. You've got, I believe that there's a big old nose tackle from California that they're talking to. Haven't offered yet. Manoa Fapusa, who's like listed from anywhere between 320 and 380. If you look at his film, he looks a lot like Sean Sevillano did before he got the Notre Dame and lost a bunch of weight. Big 300, like he's at least 340, Sean, at least 340. But pretty athletic for his size, but he's a nose. He's a pure nose. You got him on the board. There's a couple other kids like Jamion Winfield's on the board. Malik Brooks is on the board. Notre Dame likes them both a ton. There's some interest there, but there's a lot of work to do if they're going to have a shot. So they're kind of on the outside looking in. But, Sean, that's a pretty good board. If you get 2 of Hola, Clark, Simeon, that's a pretty good D-tackle class on top of maybe getting an Elijah Golden who could also end up maybe being inside. So there's a board here for Notre Dame to have a really good defensive line class on top of what you just got last year with Chris Burgess that you and I think is a top 100 player. I'm super high on Joseph Reif. Dom Hulak you've talked to people in Chicago that talked about Dom Hulak moving to defensive end this year and being really good. I'm high on Gordy Solstead, but he's a way down the road boomer bust project type of guy because of the knee injury. But when you look at his board at D-tackle, Sean, it's a good board. The problem is it's a small board, and you kind of got to hit the inside straight in order to have it happen. And that's my concern is if you miss on some of these guys, you're starting over at D-tackle, and that's where we've been, and that's been the problem. Yeah. So the question is going to be, can you get Tiki Hola? Can you get Elijah Golden? Can you get Damari Simeon or Noah Clark? That's going to be the question. And when the board's this small with no guys in the class, that's what has me a little bit nervous. I love the board as far as who's on it. The question is, is there enough on the board for you to be able to have a couple misses and still have a darn good D-tackle class? That's the question mark.
Yeah, this is we were up front, This is a very important class for multiple reasons. When it comes to the defensive line, it's a very important class, because 24, 25, for the most part, have not been what it needs to be to close the gap. And so this right here, this is why you supplement or why they supplemented in the transfer portal. And now, you have some must gets. The pressure is on, right?
Yeah.
You have some must gets. And that board, like you said, you like what you see on the board, but now the execution has to be there. The execution has to be there because you can't say you're going to have 2 guys drafted into the NFL. Yep. So that is okay. You got 2 guys drafted into the NFL. The scouts love Notre Dame players, when they look at their film. And that's why it was a surprise to see Maris and JD drafted where they were drafted last year. That was unexpected. I expect Howard Cross and Riley Mills to be drafted probably higher than most people expect, So the next step is going to be whether or not they can fill out a class that makes us say, okay, they hit the mark. They hit the mark. They got everything. And like you said, if they can get 2 of those guys on the interior, and then add Elijah Golden, and Elijah Golden can be the wild card depending upon how things
And
play
that's where
out.
I think he ends up, especially
Yeah,
if you get Mikal Blade.
yeah.
I just think because he's at Smitty went and saw him this weekend. He said he's at like 255 right now, but that's because he's lost weight for wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
He was around like 280 during the season. And I think ultimately that's where Elijah Gold's going to be. He's going to be more of that Riley Mills body type than he is a defensive end. Now, he may play it early, but I think he'll follow the Riley Mills track. And I hope he's okay with that, because I think that's where his upside is the greatest. But he is sort of that hybrid guy, meaning I don't know that he's coming in day one and helping you at 3 technique. But if you get him as like, is that not your ideal 5-man class? Like Blade at end, you get Golden as your swing guy, you get Ebenezer Edewade or Rodney Dunham at Viper, and then you get Tiki Hola, and then one of those other guys, whether it's Simeon or Clark or whatever, and then your 5 is Elijah Golden. 5 not in ranking 1 through 5, but 2 edge, 2 interiors, and then 1 swing. That's a heck of a D-line class, Shaun. But here's the problem. In order to get that, your batting percentage needs to be really flipping high based on where your board is right now.
Mm-hmm. But I think they have a shot because, like you said, you pointed out, I've talked to the kids, and in previous years, the communication and the vibe coming from the coaches and the kids is totally different than what it was in 24 and 25. Like I don't know if there was a conversation. Things are different.
I wonder, I do believe there was a conversation, but I also wonder if one of the issues, and again, I use issue lightly because recruiting has been very good at Notre Dame, but one of the issues, especially this past cycle, this past year seemed to be the year where there was more of a not on the same page with the recruiting staff and the coaching staff.
Yeah.
And there was some coaches wanted certain guys and the recruiting staff wanted certain guys, and then they were both recruiting the guys they wanted, and that created some mixed messages, which ended up hurting them on the trail a little bit. One thing that we're saying so far, and this is partly because there's not a recruiting coordinator right now or a GM that's actively recruiting right now, is now the coaches are just kind of going after the guys they want.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, making it a little bit cleaner. So that's something that Marcus Green is going to have to make sure that they are a little bit more on the same page with the new group of people coming in, is the coaches and the recruiting staff got to get a little bit more on the same page than what we were this past cycle. If they can do that, then I think they'll be in a better position. And that's going to be interesting. So does that change when the recruiting staff comes in? I don't know. And but that's the key, Shaun, is it's a good board right now, but you've got to kind of hit the inside straight. And if Al Washington does that, then we can kind of put the rest, the whole he can't recruit thing and all this other kind of stuff. That's what, and ultimately, Shaun, that's where this comes down to, is Al Washington has a great opportunity this year to either let people know you were right about him or to shut people up. And that's on and off the field, recruiting and team-wise. And if you're him, you got to be chomping at the bit to kind of have that opportunity. He hears the noise. All these coaches hear the noise. They know. It may not bother them, but they know. But that's the thing, is he has that chance. Like you said earlier, Shaun, this isn't Mike Elson's group anymore. It's not him coaching up Mike Elson's kids anymore. Yes, they have the 2 portal kids, but that's the minority of the depth chart, is guys that somebody else coached. This is now his group. The negative is if it doesn't go well, you get all the blame. You know what I mean? But the positive is if the D-line plays as well as I think you and I think it could play this year, then you start to silence that, okay, well, he's a good developer. But is he a good developer and a good recruiter? That's the question right now. And that's where this recruiting aspect has got to come in. He's got to have a high success rate with the guys on the board. Now, the board will expand, and there's going to be someone we're talking about in May that we're not talking about today that's a good football player. But we can only talk about where the board is now. I can't talk about what may be on the board down the road. That's going to be a key for them, is as a staff, is you've got to make sure identifying talent well, you got to close talent well. And that's going to be the key, because if he can do both, then all of a sudden he goes from being a guy that people perceive to be the question mark on the defensive staff to a guy that's considered a strength and a guy you don't want to lose. Like, you want to be in a situation where in a couple years of, 2, 3, 4 years, whenever Al Washington leaves because he gets a D coordinator job or a head coaching job or something somewhere, they're talking about him like we're talking about Mike Mickens. Like, you can't afford to lose that guy. Right now, that's not where he is right now. Right or wrong, that's not where the conversation is. You need it to get there, right? Because that's not where the conversation was for Mike Mickens going into 2022. You and I, that's not what people are saying about Mike Mickens going into 2022. Now the guy's like, oh my God, you can't replace Mike Mickens. And I don't necessarily disagree with you. But you need Al Washington to get there, Shaun, because that's the missing link to this team really taking that next step where the margin for error is way smaller than it is now. And you maintain that not only are you a dominant defense, but you're going to continue to be one, but you have to get to the point where your defensive line can be more consistently dominant. That's going to be a big, big key. Big, big key.
It's the last box to be checked, honestly.
Yeah.
Defensively.
Agree.
Yeah.
Agree. Well, Shaun, that's kind of a look at the defensive line board. I don't know that there's anybody on that board right now that I have on commit watch for like the next month. Not saying it won't happen, but I think all of our feedback is all these kids are at least going to go through spring visits to Notre Dame and other places. Mm-hmm. Then as we get into official visit period, then I think we start to say, okay, where are things? Who are they going to close on in June and July? So you're entering a period now, March, April, May, June, where this next 4 months is going to determine what this D-line class is going to look like. Closing on the guys on the board, but also just because this is the board today doesn't mean that's going to be the board a week from now, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now. You got to keep recruiting, keep going after guys. I mean, Mike Mickens has a pretty good board in the secondary, but he evaluates Jordan Edmonds and is like, hey, I like that kid. Let's go offer that kid, even though you like your cornerback board. Because right now, none of them are committed outside of Chaz Smith. So until guys commit, you keep recruiting, you keep expanding the board. And I'm going to see, I'm looking forward to seeing, I'm not looking forward. I'm looking to see if Al Washington continues to do that, stay consistent with the strong effort we've seen so far. These next 4 months are going to determine it. The spring period, getting guys on the campus for visits, impressing them during the visits. Because I think when kids visit Notre Dame this spring, defensive line, they're going to look at the group of players and be like, holy crap, like, those are some dudes. And they're going to look at Bryce Young and Boubacar. Even if Boubacar's not practicing, you're going to see him. You're going to see that he's 6'4.5" and he's 250 and he's got super long go-go gadget arms. You're going to see 6'7", 260 Bryce Young. You're going to see Josh Burnham, who's 6'4", 250, long arms, athletic. You're going to see Logan Thomas, who I remember coming out of high school, his high school coach claimed, because he was on the 4x100 team, said that they timed him at 10.8 in the 100-meter dash as part of as a defensive end.
Yeah.
Like you're and then you look inside, you're going to have Gabriel Rubio's massive. Jason Onye looks like $1 million. I mean, Jason Onye looks like a guy that's going to eventually be a professional wrestler. Just chiseled and broad-shouldered and all that. You're going to have Jared Dawson, who's over 300 pounds. You're going to have Sevillano, who's a monster. Davion Dixon, who's a monster. Ardmo Mukum is kind of a freaky built guy. They're going to be impressed by what they see if they get on campus. And that's going to be the key, is get those kids on campus for unofficials and then followed up with the summer officials. That stretch is going to be huge for Al Washington. You got to stick with it, because that's how you close. Because there's only one question right now. The evaluations I like, right? The board I like. The question is, can you close? That's the big unknown. We're not saying he's going to. We're not saying he's not going to. What you're saying and what I'm saying is we need to sit back and let it play out and see if he can. And if he can't, then we can have the conversation about what's going on here. If he can, then we can say, hey, guys, maybe they're rolling now. Now that he's produced on the field, maybe now he's fit and he's gotten comfortable with what his pitch is at Notre Dame. Now he's rolling, or not. We're going to find that out. But like the board, next 4 months is going to be key. Because I think you nailed it, Shaun. This is the final box to check.
He has been, in baseball terms, a selective hitter when it comes to recruiting, because he had those veteran guys and he had guys in the pipeline. He could be selective about the guys, and he could probably be a little bit more patient. I don't think that's the approach he should have taken from the jump. I think he should have been aggressive from the moment he got to Notre Dame. But I think now there's definitely been an adjustment in his approach to defensive line recruiting from what with the early returns we're receiving and the early communication we're receiving from everybody connected to these guys on the board. So why that happened, we can only speculate. We can only speculate why that's happened. But all we need to know is it has happened. And now we get to see if it can bear different fruit along the defensive line in the 26th class. So the spring is going to be very telling. The guys that haven't been to Notre Dame, are they going to get to Notre Dame? And then do they ultimately set up official visits in the summertime? So, yeah, we're a couple of weeks away of finding out how things are going to start to play out.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun period of time, Shaun. So that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. We're gonna get here done a little before 5 o'clock, so that's going to be good. We're not going to get quite to 4 hours today, Shaun, because we canceled that whole segment. Could you imagine how long this show would have gone if we'd had not done that? But thanks for being with us today, everybody. Trevor and I will be back tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Shaun and I are, when this show's over, we're going to have a little conversation about maybe getting him back on later this week for us to be able to have that conversation about the top teams. And it's not a whole lot different than the one we had a few weeks ago where we talked about tiers. I mean, it is kind of similar to that. But we're going to look at it from a little bit of a different angle. So we'll talk about that. And then I know Shaun's going to be with you guys a couple times next week because I will be out of town next week. I'm going on my first vacation. Angela looked it up, Shaun. She went and found some pictures. And the last true vacation I took was 2011. So much needed vacation coming up. I'll still be working. You know that. I'm going to still be doing a little bit of work, but not quite as much. And I won't be doing any shows. We're going to have a great week of content scheduled for you guys next week. But this week, I'm going to be with you, and we're going to have a lot of great shows. So tomorrow, Trevor and I will be back with you guys to have a Notre Dame topic show. Looking forward to that. It's going to be a lot of fun. Buy So Hold on Wednesday. Thursday, another team topic. Friday, we're going to start talking about spring ball, these next couple shows. And then Friday, we're going to have a mailbag. So a lot going on. So for Shaun Davis, I'm Brian Driscoll. Have an awesome rest of your day, everybody. No IB Nation sports talk tonight. Shaun Davis is sick. He got home last night from
I'm actually feeling pretty good.
What's that?
You said Shaun Davis.
Shaun Stiers. Sorry, my bad. Shaun Stiers is sick. All these Shauns. Shaun Stiers is sick. He's got the flu, so keep him in your prayers so that they won't be doing a show tonight. He got back from North Carolina last night, not feeling real well. Woke up this morning sick as well. So no IB Nation sports talk tonight. Hopefully Shaun will be feeling better for tomorrow. So until tomorrow at 1 o'clock when I'm joined by Trevor, have an awesome rest of your day, everybody. And we'll talk to you again soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.